All right, welcome to Mulder. Glad you're here today. Hey, those of you who came to the late service because you slept in at the early service, welcome to be here today. Maybe you thought you were coming to 9:30, but instead you came a little bit later. Glad you're here, and of course all the panic that's all about us, the fear. How would you even go out in public because of the threats of sickness? But it is real. It's very likely probably this week I expect probably we'll have our first cases of coronavirus in our own state, and I don't know about you, but I have made some preparations for this. I hope last week Molly went out and got some extra groceries for us just in case we have an outbreak in this area and there's quarantine. I encourage you to think about that, doing something similar. If you are not feeling well, if you're sick, if you're coughing and feeling like you have a cold coming on, I encourage you to maybe check out the podcast that week or the video that particular week, and stay home and don't infect everybody, okay? So I can't force you to do that, but we may set up like a quarantine section in the worship center, just have just a little curtains around there, but no, it's something to be mindful of. But it may have been that we've all already had it and we didn't know. It's kind of like we didn't know we were supposed to be afraid until someone told us that we were. Today we're starting a new series, Naaman the Syrian. And I don't know about you, but I love challenges. For Valentine's Day, Molly got the boys a putting green. It's like a 7-foot long little putting thing. You just practice your putting on, and just something for them to go outside and play with. Matthew, our oldest son, he's only played golf on the Nintendo Wii, so he's learning about how to play golf. And so we're starting him early, hoping maybe by 22 he'll be on the tour. Who knows? If he's like his daddy, he definitely won't be. But Matthew doesn't like just to put it into the hole. He likes to create challenges to make it creative. And so this is a challenge. He comes up with all kinds of different challenges. Here's one where he puts the wagon, and you have to putt under the wagon to get to the hole. And then here's another one with balls in the middle of the green. How you can get there, I don't know. But then this is my personal favorite, all the cones. That's like a par 5 or something. I think, Howard, you got one right here, right by the hole. Get into the hole. And so he likes challenges. For me, just putting it into the hole is challenging enough. But I don't know about you, but I like challenges. When I was growing up, or a computer game, sometimes if it's like a different setting, easy, medium, or hard. I played on the hard setting. It's the most challenging setting, especially if it involved some kind of strategy. If I look at different choices before me, the most challenging one is sometimes the one that I would choose. Oftentimes, it might be I would be drawn toward that, or if sometimes I think that felt like that was the one God wanted me to do. If it was harder, that must be what God wants me to do, and that can be good that you like challenges, because it can bring out the best in you. You want to be excellent at what you do, and kind of iron sharpening iron kind of deal. But it can also not be so good, because it can be a sign of pride that we won't satisfy for the easy option, but it's got to be what's most difficult. And pride can rob us of some of the most meaningful, the best things in life. Well, today I want to tell you about a guy who loved challenges. And he lived his life facing challenges and overcoming challenges. He was a warrior. More than a warrior, he was a general. And by his strategic mind and his physical strength, he overcame his enemies time and time again. Until one day, in a season of his life, he had a challenge that he couldn't overcome. And when faced with different options of a solution, when it seemed too easy, he walked away. And his name was Naaman. Naaman lived 800 years thereabouts before Jesus. It's interesting that he's spoken about in the Bible. He's kind of an obscure character in the Old Testament, but it's interesting that he's mentioned at all, because he was the commanding officer, the commander of the army of a foreign nation. He was not from the people of Israel. He was not an Israelite. In fact, he was from the nation of Aram. If you look at a map, Aram was situated to the northeast of Israel. This is how the map of the Middle East would have looked in the days of the kings. You had the kingdom of Israel, which originally was the northern 10 tribes, and the kingdom of Judah to the south, which is Benjamin and Judah were the two tribes to the south. It's interesting when you look at this map, you see similarities today. Like this is kind of where the Gaza Strip is, and this is where Lebanon is. And Aram was to the northeast, and there was a nation that came to be known as, that still occupies almost the exact same area, known as the nation of Syria. The capital is Damascus, and in those days, Aram and Israel had constant territorial disputes. At times, they would go to war over these different areas that they were disputing over, these villages and towns that Israel claimed and Aram claimed. And today, we're centuries later, Syria is ruled by a dictator named Assad. They're not exactly friends with Israel. There is disputed territory called the Golan Heights that Israel occupies. And so we see that things haven't really changed. They're not a friend of Israel, and Aram was not a friend in those days either. And this is what we're told about Naaman, beginning in 2 Kings chapter 5, verse 1. It says, Naaman was commander of the army of the king of Aram. He was the chairman of the joint chiefs, the equivalent of that in his day. He was a great man in the sight of his master. He was highly regarded, greatly respected by those who knew him, because through him the Lord had given victory to Aram. He was victorious, which is an interesting way to describe it, that the Lord gave him victory, because Naaman was not a believer in the Lord. He was a valiant soldier, very brave. And so he had this list of great accomplishments of all that Naaman had done. This overcomer, overachiever, a man who met challenges and overcame them. But we have this caveat here. It's kind of like there's an intentional contrast. Highly regarded, great man, valiant soldier, victorious, but he had leprosy. Now, leprosy is spoken of frequently in the Bible. It could be any number of skin diseases in that day. They were all called leprosy. There was a variant of a skin disease referred to as leprosy that was an infection in the skin caused by staph or strep infections that could lead to gross disfigurement. There was not antibiotics to treat these kind of infections in those days. But it's likely what Naaman had was something that's called Hansen's disease, which is true leprosy. It's a disease that causes skin to be scaly and sometimes to turn a lighter color. And what it does is that it damages the nerves in the skin so that you lose sensation, particularly in the extremities of your body, your hands, your feet, sometimes your face. And the loss of those nerves means that you can't feel anything. You can't feel pain, which can lead to injuries, which can lead to the crippling of your hands and feet. Effectively, you can't use them anymore because you can't feel them. So it was a serious disease that spread over parts of the body for which there was no cure. And so you can imagine Naaman and the king of Aram going to every length to find a cure for his commander, for the general who leads his armies into battle, searching every physician, every sort of hokey cure peddler in that day to try to find someone who can heal Naaman. Searching for first opinions, second opinions, third opinions, all the different doctors, the best doctors in Aram, to no avail. But a recommendation comes from a surprising place. From a slave girl, young girl who'd been taken as a slave to Naaman's wife. And we're told in verse 2, it says, Now bands of raiders from Aram had gone out and had taken captive a young girl from Israel. And she served Naaman's wife. And she said to her mistress, this young girl, she said, If only my master would see the prophet who is in Samaria. Now, Samaria was the capital of Israel. Jerusalem was the capital of Judah to the south. Samaria was the capital of the kingdom of Israel to the north. If he could just see this prophet, he would cure him of his leprosy. He could cure him. I've seen wonders done by this prophet or heard about them. And so Naaman decides to pursue this. He goes to his master, to his boss, the king of Syria, the king of Aram, And he says to him, he probably saw him every day. He was his right-hand man. He went to his master and told him what the girl from Israel had said. And of course, the king says, go for it. I mean, here's someone who can help you. We've tried everything else. He said, by all means, go. And here's what I'll do. I'll send a letter to the king of Israel. And on top of that, I won't just send a letter giving instructions from my official seal that this is a sign that I'm sending you under my authority and I want this prophet to heal him. I'm going to also send you with some money. Okay? And so Naaman left, and he took with him 10 talents of silver, 6,000 shekels of gold, and 10 sets of clothing. Now, just to give you an idea how much money this is, in that day, the average wage for a common laborer that day was 10 shekels of gold a year. Okay? So he's going with 6,000 shekels of gold, 600 times what the average annual wage of a common laborer is. But that doesn't even compare with the silver. He's taking 10 talents of silver. Now, shekels and talents are both measurements of weight, and a talent was about 75 pounds. And so he's taking 750 pounds of silver on top of the gold and these 10 sets of clothing. Okay, it's estimated that in that day that the buying power that this amount of wealth would have been is $750 million. Okay? So Naaman sets out, and he's not just Naaman going by himself. He's got a caravan. He's got an entourage, horses, chariots, camels, donkeys, mules. They're carrying all of this as they go down, probably guards to guard the wealth as they go to Israel. And he sends a letter to the king of Israel that says, with this letter, I'm sending my servant, go back to verse 6, was not finished there. I'm sending my servant Naaman to you so that you may cure him of his leprosy. He sends a letter to the king of Israel, which is interesting. The way he words it, so that you may cure him of his leprosy. Because the common understanding in all of the world in that day was that the prophets worked for the kings. I mean, they were part of the inner circle, that political machine that made up a nation. The religion was all part of it. Every country kind of had their own god, their own prophets. And so there's this assumption that the prophet works for you, king. I mean, he's in your territory. He's in your kingdom. Except he doesn't seem to know how it works in Israel. Israel was different than all the other nations. Because the prophets in Israel answered to a higher king. They didn't work for the king of Israel, and at times they were at odds with the king of Israel, as was the case in this time. And so Naaman shows up in Samaria to the palace of the king of Israel. And here's what happens. It said, as soon as the king of Israel read the letter, he tore his robes, which is a sign of great grief, great panic and fear, and says, am I God? Can I kill and bring back to life? Why does this fellow send someone to me to be cured of his leprosy? What? I mean, I can't do this. This is crazy. And this has got to be another hidden motive. I mean, he sees everything through that political lens. Here's the most powerful warrior in all of Aram, the neighboring country, coming to him with $750 million carrying behind him. He's trying to pick a fight with me. Now, just for some historical background, we're not told who the king of Israel is at this time, but it's likely that it was Joram. And King Joram was the son of King Ahab and Queen Jezebel. Okay, so maybe that might tell you all that you need to know. And even though Ahab had died, Jezebel was still alive and would have been the power behind the throne, if you were, at that time, the king's mother. And so perhaps that would tell you about all you should know about the king of Israel. He's terrified. He sees an impending war disaster upon his kingdom. Well, in the midst of this, sort of like, I envision it like one of those old westerns, you know, or where somebody comes in the saloon, they talk about the villain who's going to stand up against this. He's terrorizing the town. And there's a guy sitting back in the corner raises his cowboy hat and says, I can take him out. I'm your Huckleberry. Elisha, he sends a message. And he heard the man of God, Elisha the man of God, heard the king of Israel had torn his robes. And he sent this message. Why have you torn your robes? Have the man come to me, and he will know that there is a prophet in Israel. I can cure him. Of course, it's not my power that will cure him. The power of the Lord God of Israel. That power that you know nothing about, for like your mother, you worship foreign gods. So, Naaman sets out. And we're told that Naaman goes with his horses and chariots and stopped at the door of Elisha's house. So imagine this caravan, this entourage, the commander of the armies of Aram, riding in his chariot, being accompanied by all of this large caravan, these warriors, these guards. They pull up with their horses and mules and chariots, and they pull up and they pull up at Elisha's house, okay? And what kind of house do you imagine that Elisha lived in? I mean, Elisha the prophet. Probably very simple. A very simple house. A simple shack. I mean, they weren't known for all of the wealth that they carried. Very simple life. So Naaman pulls up. He pulls up at Elisha's house. And here's what happens. It said Elisha sent a messenger to say to him, go wash yourself 7 times in the Jordan, and your flesh will be restored, and you will be cleansed. Elisha doesn't even come out. I mean, here's this glorious chariots. I mean, I kind of imagine like the scene from Sweet Home Alabama when the mayor of New York City comes to visit Reese Witherspoon's house, you know, and her parents, and like the limo pulls up, and her dad's like, yeah, you got bit by a mosquito. That's the state bird of Alabama. You know, I mean, it's the yellowhammer's our state bird, by the way. But I just kind of imagine that kind of, and so here's this caravan, and Elisha, who up to this shack, and Elisha won't even get out. He doesn't even come out to meet him. I mean, Naaman's used to being treated like royalty. You come out, you bow down. I mean, that's who he runs with. And so the man who lives in the shack won't even come out. He sends a messenger. And look at what he says. He says, go and wash 7 times in the Jordan, and you will be cleansed. Okay? How do you think Naaman, a guy who has spent his life crushing the skulls of his opponent, leading military campaigns, a brilliant strategist, in the inner circle of the powerful king of Aram, how do you think he will react to this? I mean, what kind of, is this a joke? Is this some kind of a joke request? Naaman went away angry and said, well, I thought at least he would come out to me and see me face to face and stand and call on the name of the Lord his God and wave his hand over the spot and cure me of my leprosy. I mean, if he could just send a messenger, why did they even come in the first place? And there was a general belief that like the power of the God was in the prophet, and so the prophet had to be there for this to take place. And here he's telling me to go and wash in the Jordan River 7 times? I mean, what, does he take me for a fool? And why do I have to go to the Jordan River? I mean, look, he says, are not Abana and Parfar, the rivers of Damascus, better than all the waters of Israel? This puny Jordan River? I mean, if it was just washing in the river, why don't I just stay in Damascus and come here? He's just come here to humiliate me. I don't have to take this. I mean, I may have this disease. I do at least have my pride. I don't have to take this. I mean, I've been scammed. I thought this was going to be some great prophet. I guess this is what happens when you listen to the advice of a slave. And so he goes off in a rage. I wonder how many times you've missed opportunities for healing, for wholeness, for fullness, for restoration, for freedom, because the solution just seemed too easy. Or maybe it didn't stroke your ego. Or that person who delivered it, they seemed kind of abrasive. They were a little bit offensive. They didn't appeal to your pride and tell you how wonderful that you were. And you were turned off. I'm above all that. What do you think I am? You think I'm some kind of common person? You think I'm like one of them? I'm different. I have a different set of standards. I mean, look at what I've achieved in life. Do you think I'm equal to you? And so Naaman walks off, full of anger. Thankfully, Naaman has some people in his life who love him. And perhaps as a sign of the good leader that he was, it's his slaves, it's his servants. Again. And they come to him, the commander of the armies of Aram, and they plead with him and say to him, "My father, if the prophet had told you to do some great thing, would you not have done it? How much more then when he tells you to wash and be cleansed?" In other words, boss, what do you have to lose? What do you have to lose except maybe your pride? And really, you're already losing that. I mean, your face is going to fall off. I mean, really, what do you have to lose? You've come all this way. Give it a try. And so Naaman does, to his credit. He listens to them. And he goes to the Jordan River. And it says that he dips himself 7 times in the Jordan. And you can imagine, like, after number 5 or 6, thinking, what am I doing? This is crazy. Dipping in the Jordan 7 times. But he comes up the 7th time. And as the man of God had told him, his flesh was restored and became clean like that of a young boy. He's healed. But he's not just physically healed. He's changed. He comes out of those waters different. Something he never expected would happen. In fact, he would seem to be the last person that this would happen to. He goes back to Elisha's house. He goes back to the shack. And in this time, I imagine that instead of expecting Elisha to come out and bow down to him, he goes and knocks on the door, or he bows down to Elisha. And he says to him, all his entourage, they go back, and he stands before him and he says, "Now I know there's no God in all the world except in Israel. I know this God is real. So please, accept a gift from your servant." He describes himself as a servant. "Accept some of this cool $750 million I've carried with me." And Elisha says, "No thanks. As surely as the Lord lives, whom I serve, I will not accept a thing." I mean, he'd be perfectly in his rights to take it. But I didn't do it for that. And besides, I don't serve another king. I don't serve the king of Israel. I don't serve gods of wealth and power and status. I serve the Lord God who lives and reigns forever, who owns the cattle on the 1,000 hills. So I won't take it. And even though Naaman urged him, he refused. So Naaman said, I do have one thing I want you to do for me. So would you give me as much earth, as much dirt from Israel as 2 mules can carry? Because I brought a cart, and I guess and that entourage that he had, and and he said, "Let me, your servant, be given as much earth as a pair of mules can carry, for your servant will never again make burnt offerings and sacrifices to any other god but the Lord." In that day, the instruction had been given to Moses to make, when you make an altar to the Lord, don't make it from metal and gold and shiny things that have been hammered out by a tool, but make it of earth, of the common things. And so I want this dirt from Israel to remind me that my God is Israel's God. And not just that, but that Israel's God is the only God. And there's one more thing too, that when I go with my master, the king of Aram, he worships in the temple of Rimmon. And when I go into that temple and he's leaning on my arm as I'm helping to hold him up, and I bow down with him in the temple of Rimmon, don't take that as meaning that I'm bowing to the god Rimmon. In fact, no. May the Lord forgive me for this, because my heart belongs to the Lord. Don't take the actions in this temple as a sign that my devotion lies in any other place. And Elisha sends him away with a blessing. And so Naaman's life is changed by a simple act of obedience. A simple act changed Naaman's life forever. An act of faith. But was it an act of faith? I mean, did he have faith? Maybe. It wasn't. It was just a simple act of obedience. Very reluctantly. He did what the prophet told him to do, even though it made no sense to him, even though it was an insult to his pride and all of his accomplishments. He did it. And he was changed forever. Can you relate? Maybe it was a meeting you went to reluctantly, a weekend retreat, a mission trip. Maybe it was a class you signed up for. Maybe it was an aisle that you walked. And you had all the reasons why you shouldn't. But you knew in your heart of hearts, even though it was an insult to your pride, you knew in your heart of hearts is what you had to do. And as a result, you were changed. Your heart was changed. And perhaps you would think that you would have been the last one to be gushing, to become a Jesus freak. But it did. A simple act changed Naaman's life forever. And a simple act can change your life forever. I wonder for you today, for all of us, what's your leprosy? Is it a chronic illness? Chronic pain? Is it emotional pain? Is it a strained relationship? Is it a bad habit? An addiction? A fear? Maybe it's regret over a decision that you've made, punishing yourself. What's your leprosy? Because it's significant that Naaman had leprosy. Because in that day, it was believed that leprosy was a sign of displeasure from the gods, that you had been rejected by the gods. Well, maybe it seems too easy to obey. It seems beneath us. It doesn't make sense. I mean, why Jesus? Of all the gods, of all the different ways, why this one way? Why should His way be superior than all the others? And why can't God just do it? He wants to heal me, just heal me. He wants to save me, just save me. Why do I have to obey? Especially when it doesn't make sense. But then some of you have. And you've been changed forever. See, leprosy in this case represents sin. something far more serious than any skin disease or the coronavirus, but something that we are all infected with. What does God want us to do? What does He expect of us? This is what the crowds asked Jesus in John chapter 6. What must we do? What does God want us to do? The works He requires. And Jesus answered, the work of God is this, to believe in the one He has sent. In other words, to believe in me. But I love the way the psalmist puts it, David in Psalm 34, verse 8. Taste and see that the Lord is good. Have you tasted and seen that the Lord is good? Tasted for yourself? After I graduated from college, my life was changed when I was in college, and I just came out with a lot of energy and zeal for the Lord. And the fall of my year after I graduated, I was 22 years old. I attended an event called the Walk to Emmaus, and I had seen how people who had been on this 3-day event, this 3-day weekend, how it had just changed their lives, and it had brought energy into Abbeville United Methodist Church, which was kind of a dead church when I was growing up, and these people were just enthusiastic and they were changed. And someone who I wanted to invite to attend on this walk with me that weekend was a dentist in town in Abbeville, and I was beginning to preach some where at my home church after I graduated college, just kind of getting experience, and he would come up to me and just tell me how much he enjoyed my preaching, and so just kind of stroked my ego in that way, so I naturally liked him. But I knew who he was, and I always knew he was kind of a cynical person. He spoke to my high school when the AIDS was so rampant. There was so much concern about the spread of AIDS, and he made the comment to us that, like, this is maybe nature's solution to too many people walking around on this earth, which I was, like, really taken aback by that statement. I was like, that's a lot of very cynical view of the human race. But I just felt led to ask him to attend this weekend with me, that walk to Emmaus, and there was several others from my church were going. And so he went, and he was miserable. Like he was sitting in the room where the events were taking place. He had a scowl on his face, but he was like, get up and leave the room, and we're kind of in a different area of the room, so I didn't know exactly all that was going on. But we had a worship service that night, and that was a very powerful service. And then afterwards, he came up to me and he hugged me and he said, Matt, thank you so much for inviting me to go on this weekend. I love you. I thought, wow, something's happened here. Something has happened. And what was happening was the reason he was getting up and leaving and why there was a scowl on his face was because he was in severe neck pain. He had an injury in the upper part of his back and his neck that was causing a pinched nerve, and he was in severe pain. And so he was getting up and leaving. So what they had done, someone had done, there was an area during the weekend where there's prayers that are always being offered, a prayer chapel, and I didn't even know it was there. I didn't know hadn't even been in there. And so they had taken him into that prayer chapel, and they had anointed him with oil and prayed over him. And in that act of being prayed over, he felt something. And that pain went away. And in that moment, he was changed. And he said, I know this God is real. Friends, I hope that you won't let pride prevent you from tasting and seeing that the Lord is good. From a simple act of faith and obedience.